Well, welcome, Craig. My name is John. I am the head of sales with Outbuild. And Craig, again, thank you for joining today. We'd love to start by hearing a bit more about you. Your current role at Wells and Wells, and then a bit of background on how you got into construction. I think it'd be an interesting question to get to.
Sure. No, thanks for having me. Name's Craig Loschen. And so been with Wells and Wells for going on 9 years, coming up in this May. Been in construction for a little over, gosh, dating myself here, going on 25 years now. Um, so yeah, started got some interest in kind of doing some residential work when I was in high school, locally, and it sparked my interest. Went to college, got a construction management degree, Western Illinois University, and was fortunate to get a job with the general contractor out of St. Louis, and you know really just continued to grind at it and just enjoyed it. I think what was really attracted me to construction was just the fact that you could start with a piece of dirt, some lines on a piece of paper, and 8 months, 12 months, 14 months later, you've got a building that's being used by people for whatever, whether it was education, churches, office buildings. It's just a very rewarding career field to be part of. Um, and as I tell some of the younger people that we interview, it's something different every day. And I was just telling, your colleague here before we got on, it was a busy day today. I had 4 different meetings. It was 4 different projects. And we were actually talking on one of those meetings, we're learning something new. I've been in this for 25 years, and every day is a new challenge. There's a new, a new opportunity, as I like to call it, that presents itself, that we got to work and collaborate with, and come up with solutions. So it's very rewarding, and it's definitely, it does not get boring. So it's a fun part to be part of. Um, Kind of jumping ahead, my role here, fast forward a lot of years. My role here at Wells and Wells, being a vice president, project executive, it's again learning, as you move up into different roles, learning how to embrace what I'm doing now, from when I started 25 years ago, being in the field doing project engineer work, out there, measuring stuff with a tape measure and all that stuff, to now managing a team of people, brings new and challenging opportunities every day. So again, nothing is boring. There's new challenges that come every day, no matter what kind of role or level that you're at with construction.
It must be. I like that you said, the 25 plus year you've been in construction, but you've been in construction at this time when technology has made such a leap. So you probably started, like you said, with a pen and paper, and now you're here where everything has to be on a computer. I a little younger, but I had to experience this too when my dad, my grandfather, um, home builders in France. So it's old school way of doing anything. And now that I'm here, I come back and talk to my dad about the technology we have, and it's just like he almost doesn't believe me. He's like, "Oh, you could do that. You could, you could run a drone to get a 3D model of an existing structure, so you could better budget it." Um, it's been, yeah, and I bet what I'm getting to is I think it must have been fun for you to see that transition, and especially in a role where you're now, where you're more so helping teams decide where to go more so than actually using the software. It's also important that you have been in their shoes to be able to make that call with them.
Yeah, absolutely. uh, when I say we're interviewing, I refer to them as kids. They're quite a bit younger than I am now. And I remember when I was in college, like, we were the estimating software, the scheduling pieces were just starting to come out. And literally, I mean, I remember my scheduling class, we used pen and paper and was kind of drawing on stuff. They were just starting to introduce some of this software. So yeah, especially in the last 7 years, the amount of technology that's been introduced, especially for us, it's it's exciting, but also challenging, right? For people at kind of my age and where we've kind of come from, I'm not as fluid and comfortable with that stuff. I look at my daughters, and it's like, man, they can navigate stuff. If I need help at home on, my phone or device, like, they can find it in a heartbeat. And but it's like it's something that we've, as a management team, we decided it's like we've got to keep up with the trend, and what's new, what's going to help us be more efficient in our operations from day-to-day stuff. Even if I can't, navigate it, myself, we've got to continue finding those tools that are going to help our team um, be more successful.
And to take it back to this to the scheduling, the pen and paper, what has been your exposure to the different software? And I'd be curious to hear your exposure to which software and how you get to learn them, and how it helped, and maybe what was some frustration you might have had on the features that were available. But 25 years, you've probably seen a lot of those new software being implemented. So I'd be curious to hear which ones and how you get exposed to them.
Yeah, so when I started with the company down in St. Louis, they used I think it was SureTrack Primavera
Mhm.
software, and so we would develop our overall schedules on that. But then the detail, right, the stuff that was happening out there on the job site with the site supervisors and so forth. Um, I honestly started with a superintendent that actually used carbon paper. So, there was nothing more than a flip phone and carbon paper that he had in the job site trailer, which was great to kind of see how he did stuff. So everything was on a whiteboard or a piece of paper, and he would, put it on his carbon paper and then distribute that. Um, Several years into it, we were still using the Primavera schedule software for the overall, but then they introduced Excel, and we were kind of doing the Excel look aheads and so forth. And, I think everybody has kind of shared the frustration, you got two different platforms or tools that you're using, and how do you mesh that information together? Very time consuming. And then that led to errors potentially, in transferring information. And now up until honestly, up until we got introduced to Outbuild, we were still using Excel, 20 some years later, right? We're still using this Excel spreadsheet for look aheads. Still with the same frustrations that we had 20 years ago of that information getting transferred, and mistakes that were coming up with just using two different tools.
Why would you say that your superintendents gravitated towards Excel more? Why not trying to maybe have everybody in SureTrack or this scheduling tool you had?
So, you know, pretty interesting. So, with the company down in St. Louis, I feel like, we had some superintendents that were capable of using that technology. And again, that was 20 years ago. And I fast forward to my time here at Wells and Wells, same thing, right? You got individuals that are really skilled at the field aspect of stuff. Um, and I think, for us personally, right, a lot of our superintendents started as carpenters, they had tool belts on. They understand how to put this building in place, but maybe not the most efficient with getting on a computer and
Hmm.
using Excel and stuff. So we have, again, 20 years ago and even today, we have some that are more comfortable with that technology that computer use, right? I talk about it, mid 40s, right? And it's like I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm not as fluid and efficient with the technology as somebody that's in their 20s. So I think the Excel worked for some, but we weren't consistent, across our whole staffing, field staff.
And I mean, I've heard stories and of the customers of myself when I was on my job site of the powerful thing is you need to get whatever is in your superintendent's brain somewhere so you could communicate it. That's that communication piece. And then having the people that are building giving you feedback on, oh, that might not work or that might work. And whether you use Excel or the tool, there's tools that might be better, but that's what you had at the time is, I need to put my information somewhere. And because everyone is trained somehow in using Excel or Word or something like this, you get there. But then when, you get exposed to, oh, now I need to learn CPM scheduling and again, schedule and learn new tricks and things like this. That's where we've heard a lot of time, it becomes challenging for superintendent, but also a lot of the other software solutions, because it's one user per license that has access on a computer. You probably don't want a superintendent to change things that a PM didn't put in there. Like who is in charge of that contract schedule, because you need to update a contract schedule that makes sense also to the owner. And then, that monthly update needs to make sense to the previous one. And it could be tricky to have multiple people there. So we've seen companies where the superintendent were doing all the scheduling, maybe some more technology savvy superintendent, but most of the time it's Excel because, it's easy. Let's just put my mind on an Excel spreadsheet and then I could communicate this. And when I make a change, I'll do the same again.
Yeah, it's funny you said some of the superintendents, they got it in their head. We've got a couple people on our staff, trust them 100% that they can get this job done, right? No doubt about it, no questions asked, but it's all up here.
Yeah.
And I feel like in the last 5 years, with the labor challenges that are evident out there, right? The communication to deliver this stuff. We don't have as many skilled, and I'm not saying just tradespeople, but even management people in the field, communicating that information to individual subcontractors, right, has become more of a thing that we need to do on these projects to successfully get them, complete. Whereas before, right, you had the old school guys, everybody kind of knew, their part and their role to, get a project done. I feel like, right, no matter what, if it's tradespeople, skilled plumbers, electricians, carpenters, even the foremen, even project managers from subcontractors or general contractors, we're not as experienced as we were several years ago, right? So it's like being able to communicate, that plan so it can be executed, is definitely more needed today than it probably was, years back.
And you also have to do a lot more complex projects with a lot more regulation, a lot, for the better, right? Safety regulation also more in place, which needs time to set up. And then the technical regulations that you have now are not what they were 20, 25 years ago. Again, for the better, but it requires more expert contractors to be able to manage this. And on top of this, you add all the technology piece. We ask a lot of superintendents, project managers for contractors, and not always give them the right simple tool for communication and things like this. So that it doesn't get easier, and you have less and less people available to build the jobs. That needs to be built faster and faster. So it's a combination of, it feels like technology is catching up, but you can only do so much with what you have and the people you have on a project.
Yeah, I've been saying this, to our clients. I feel like, right, these projects in the last since COVID, whether that was really, a direct reason, but these projects are harder to manage today than they were 3, 4, 5 years ago. One for, the labor and the skilled trades, but also the supply chain, issues that we all went through. I think for the most part, we're out of that, but we still got, some components here or there. And all it takes is one thing, right? We have a switch gear that is delayed. One little piece can throw off your whole project. So I feel like, these projects are so much more challenging to manage, and deliver, and they're taking longer to build. We were just having a conversation with a client, last week, and they kept going back, well, you did this building 2 years ago in 12 months. It's like, yes, that was 2 years ago. That same project, same matrix of what we're trying to do is taking 14 months to build now today. So, with that challenge, right? Time is money, and owners, developers are wanting to, drive that cost down. So if we can figure out how to deliver this building in less time, it saves, everybody money. But if we commit to that, we got to be able to execute it. So, scheduling's become more of a critical item on these projects than I believe they have been in the past.
100%. And tying to this, Mac, I'm curious about, I'm sure you have some performance metrics you track on project or monthly reporting that you do, but how does scheduling fit in there for you for the performance of a project, and how is that communicated or checked as a KPI or key performance indicator at Wells and Wells?
Yeah, so at my level, right? I'm meeting with several project teams. Our project executives are probably managing 3 to 5 different projects maybe at a time. Obviously, we can't be in the weeds, the day-to-day weeds, or nor do we have the time to. So we do look and analyze on a monthly basis, kind of a snapshot of, okay, where are we at, schedule wise, right? We're kind of tracking milestone dates. Our project team is obviously managing the day-to-day through the look ahead piece. We got the overall schedule being updated on a weekly basis, and then we kind of look at a milestone snapshot on a monthly basis. In conjunction with that, we're reviewing our budget. We're at the point where we're kind of doing projections on our general conditions, some of those kind of variable pieces, and making sure that we've got enough money, one, to complete the job, but also, if we've been very fortunate and take a lot of pride in, meeting our deadlines. 90% of our work is student housing. So, we've got to meet those August, deadlines a lot of times. School's not getting pushed off because switchgear being late. So it's a real big demand for us to ensure that we deliver these buildings for our clients, because they've got leases signed up almost by the time we break ground on these buildings. So we're watching that closely, and being profitable, and fortunately for us, we've done a very good job understanding where we're at on schedules is a big part of us being financially successful.
And if that end date doesn't move, it means that if for some reason there's delays on the project, well, what you need to do is more resources, more time, more weekends, and we all know how not fun these projects are, because then your quality goes down and productivity you think goes up, but you're just working more hours. Safety gets probably impacted, so it's also you have that time to hit, and in your case you can't move it. So it's how do we manage our team to avoid having to crunch 4 months of work in the last 3 months, or in the last 2 months.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we've been kind of, I don't want to say preaching, but discussing with our team is, I by understanding our schedules, and really being in tune with that from really a day-to-day basis. One of the things we've kind of talked about was maximizing opportunities to gain time. I think there's too much focus on, we use these look aheads and schedules, like we got to recognize when there's a delay, and we do. You got to understand when there's a delay. But I think one of the biggest missed opportunities is, like, when we're picking up time, do we maximize that? Say, we've got our MEP trades, and they've blown it out of the water, and they've finished their tasks maybe 5 days earlier than they were scheduled to. By being up to date with our schedule and our teams understanding that, are we maximizing that gain, which in turn, right, is helping with schedule, helping with cost, right? If we can finish a project ahead of schedule, we're saving money and saving costs there. So I think that's been one of the things. I'm always an optimistic kind of guy. It's like, use these schedules to maximize the gains that are out there. You know, if we're not managing, yes, we want to understand when there's a sub that's slipping, but we also want to maximize when we got a sub that's performing. Do we have those next trades ready to take advantage of that gain? And so that's been something we've been focusing on as a team, is maximizing those gains.
Would you say that this was the main driver towards you implementing Outbuild, is finding a solution that, if you could finish projects earlier, it's a massive gain for you because, customers are happier, you probably save on general conditions. There's things that happen. I'm curious on what was, the main driver for you to look at a solution like Outbuild.
Yeah, I think that was definitely a part of it. I think probably the biggest thing was the collaboration, right? Going back to the Excel spreadsheets, we were just struggling, to have that collaboration between our teams and getting that look ahead piece tied in with our overall and making sure we had accurate schedules. A lot of our projects that, in the last 5 years, I would say, we went from average project size of $5 to $10 million, to, we've got several, now we're talking $40 million. They're a lot larger scale projects, a little bit more complex in nature. So, the scheduling obviously with that became a little bit more complicated, right? And you're dealing with 150 units. We don't make a deadline. You add up damages on one unit, multiply it by 150. It's big numbers. So, I think the main driver, was we saw something that, kind of forced the collaboration, the way this platform was built, with it all being tied together. And really saw some value in that piece of it. So that's what really kind of drew us to Outbuild.
It's yeah, and it ties to, how do you mitigate risk by giving access to the people that are building to see what the plan is, so they could tell you, I see a problem in a week, rather than, hey, it's today, I can't do my work. Because then that's when you have problem. That's when you have frustrated subcontractors that are, they're here to they're here to make money too. They're here to be productive. And if you're not able to communicate the project well enough so that they could come with a crew of 10 and get the work done, that's what I hear from a lot of other customers would happen if it's a printed PDF of an Excel spreadsheet. Like, if your superintendent's made updates, you have to send that PDF again, make sure people see it, and that could be, lost in communication. And I think, what we aim for at Outbuild, with giving access to the trade contractor to their plan, there's no excuse. No, I didn't see it. I didn't see the email. Well, no, we're giving you access for free. Load it up in there. Tell us what issues you have, and that will help us. If you see an issue, tell us, so we could help get it out of the way, what we call the roadblocks, and keep the projects moving.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that we got feedback from our subcontractors. We've rolled this out. I think we're approaching a year, pretty close here, and they appreciate that information, right? And when they appreciate it, especially when it's accurate, right?
Yeah.
That's part of the problem too. Going back to the Excel, right? Exactly to your point. Okay, now it's got to be emailed out. Okay, if it takes a day or two, pretty soon it's like that information can be outdated. Everything's changing, day to day on these projects. Maybe we got to shift a sequence or whatever. So, the timeliness of getting this information in front of those sub partners, is critical. And, this platform, achieves that for sure.
Have you seen any time savings? And, updating Excel into project takes probably a PM and a superintendent to sit down and do, manual data entry, where in Outbuild, that information feeds up to the schedule automatically as you update from the field. So I'd be curious on the feedback from your team there, and if you're actually being able to, you might still meet, but instead of doing clicking in Microsoft Project, now you could have a conversation about roadblocks or issues on the project that makes that meeting more valuable.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously at first when you're introducing a new tool, right, there's a learning curve with it, right? It was a new platform. So it's taken some time to get all of our team members into the platform, get them comfortable with it. But yeah, I would say just having a conversation last week with one of the project teams, we've kind of set it up where they're the field staff are kind of updating the activities as we go along the week, and then those guys are getting together with more of the project engineer, project managers. They're meeting together like on Friday afternoons, sitting down together, kind of reviewing, where they ended up at the week. And just in the last, they've been doing it now 3 weeks on this particular project, and that time frame has, it's maybe 20 minutes, right? And you're talking a $20 million size job. That's 150 units. That's, it's a good size project. In 20 minutes, they've analyzed where they're at for that whole project in that week time frame. So yeah, I would say, we are seeing some time savings. I would definitely say from the project management side, right? By not having to take this separate information from an Excel and try to insert that into, a Microsoft project schedule, and then analyze how does that shift. Yeah, there's definitely time savings on that side of things from the overall schedule update, because it's like you said, it's feeding right into those overall schedule activities.
I hope that, I don't know if you came across it yet, but we just launched this week the portfolio view of all your projects, where you could see which projects are trending in order. So that probably gives you more faith of, I know my schedule updated, so whenever I look at Outbuild, I have an accurate snapshot. I don't need to wait a month. I don't need to ask the team. I could get and find the information I need, because I think for you it's important that if you wonder how a project is doing, not to have to ask for the latest file and where is it. I'm in my own time in my office. I'm going to log in, look at how the team is doing, and I could ask some question and maybe help them out.
Yeah, and from my role, right, I don't have time to dig to the 500 activities and really, right, I'm wanting to be able to take a kind of a 5 minute
Yeah.
snapshot. It's like, okay, are we good? Is there any concerns that I need to get with my team on? And really, I don't have to, with them updating this on a more fluid basis, right? I think that was the other challenge, with Microsoft Project and then Excel, because it was such a daunting task. People were hesitant to continue just working in it, right? Because you would update that Excel, and then like a couple days later, maybe something changed. You got to open up the file. It's a lot more seamless of a process, through this platform.
I like to talk a little bit about the adoption. You put it well. There is a change, and it takes time because it's people are busy building jobs. Plus, they need to learn a new tool. Plus, it's human nature to fight change a little bit because we like what we do.
Yep.
How did you on the leadership side position it to your team to convince them that it would be worth it for them? I'm sure there was a company initiative saying we are going this way because of XYZ benefits that it will help us as a company. I'll be curious to hear that story.
Yeah, so I think our management team, we've always, probably going back 6 years, we were debating about the idea of Procore. We felt like, okay, there was a transition that was happening with kind of this digital, plan, and that's what initially we were looking at Procore for. It's like, there's so many changes that are happening with plans and updates. What is going to be the best platform to manage that aspect? And so we went to a couple builder trade shows, and interviewed and looked at different platforms, and we made the decision, and so we got Procore. Our pre-construction team was always looking for ways to be more efficient and productive on that front. So we implemented some new software, on our pre-construction estimating side. And then same thing, like we were struggling, right, with just the the look ahead piece. And one of our younger project managers was actually the one that brought Outbuild to us as a management team. Said, hey, I saw this demo. I think this might be something that could help. with this look ahead piece. And I think, immediately when I saw the demo and just the collaboration that it provided, I think the management team, the leadership saw like, okay, this is beneficial. This is going to help us. And I think that's really, what we communicated to our team was, here's a new tool. And we had kind of been struggling with trying to do different things with the Excel whiteboards, what's most efficient, right? And it's like we really saw the benefit of the collaboration piece, and ultimately this is going to save us time and make us better. And I think, that's just, we're always looking for things that can, make us better as a team, make us more efficient, make us, what can we do to add to this project to make it successful? And, that's kind of how we pitched it. And I think, everybody bought in. Not everybody, like you said, right? Everybody's hesitant with change.
Mm-hmm.
They agreed to it, but it's like, oh man, now we got to learn something new. What's this gonna, how much time is it gonna take to do this or that? And I would say, it was really embraced from our project management team right away. The field guys, right, and I think you just kind of get a different aspect from those guys, and one of our teams, they were hesitant. I think I shared this with you and your team, a couple of weeks ago, but we were having some challenges, right? And they were hesitant to use it. And through finally kind of engaging your technical side and that project team specifically, we just needed to kind of adjust a few things on our overall to allow that look ahead piece to really work the way it was intended, to work. And now that team went from not using the look ahead to now they are bringing up that look ahead on our screens and our job site trailer for our subcontractor meetings. And it's a fully engaged conversation with our sub partners. And then they're bringing up that look ahead schedule with our OAC meeting with the owners. Talk about a complete 180 in that, short, probably a 3-week period. And it was just, we just needed a little bit of guidance, and those guys bought into it right away.
How is it received from the owner side? What do they think about the approach if they're participating now?
They like it because they're getting more frequent updates.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, like we have that OAC meeting on that particular project. It's a weekly meeting, and it's a big job, right? There's a lot of risk on that job. And the owners are very interested in the schedule because on that particular job, no fault of really anybody, but we got our permits late. They were delayed by the local municipality, and no fault to us, really no fault to the owner, but we got to deal with the situation, right? Because it's a student housing project. Those kids are not getting their move-ins delayed because the local city decided, a couple of people went on vacation and then we didn't get our permits. So they're very interested in how we're managing that schedule, and we're able to confidently provide them schedule updates on a weekly basis. And we're confident because the team's updating that daily. It's feeding into our overall. So we've got a real-time understanding of, where that schedule stands. And so on that particular job, the owners love it, because they know that we're managing that on a daily basis, and it's easy to, visually, it's easy to see and understand where you're at.
And that I'm sure is a massive win on your side to feel like everything you're building project for somebody, and having that repeat work and a happy customer that in the end is seeing that you are putting yourself in with the right tools and the right situation to deliver for them. I'm sure it's very rewarding for yourself on the leadership side, but also for the teams.
Yeah, it is. And, and I think one of the things we talk about, it's like, if we're up to date with all of our information, whether it's financial, budgets, right? Understanding where we're at, from a financial standpoint, understanding where we're at from a schedule standpoint, we can make better decisions on our projects. And going back to that project I'm referring to, we were behind, no fault of the owner, no fault of us as a contractor, but being able to use this tool and kind of run some analysis, they decided to spend some money and get a second tower crane so we could accelerate the schedule. And by being able to easily navigate and understand, okay, if we do this, we can accelerate this scope of work. It's going to get us back to where we need to be. And
Are
so
you trending? Are you trending there? Are you trending to be delivering on time with the adjustments you could make?
yeah, so we are. So, we really got almost set back 50 days from
Wow.
when we were supposed to start. Not, and that's a lot to overcome,
Yeah.
before you even put a shovel in the ground. It's like, okay, now we're starting this and we're behind. And then, we started footings and we had some weather. It was a little bit wet, and we were trying to come out of winter with getting footings started. Um, Now, because of that decision, we've picked up half of that time already. So it's trending, but I think being able to analyze that schedule piece allowed the ownership of the owners and us to collaborate and make a decision, for the better of the job.
And by feeling that they are involved, right? Sometimes a lot of the other solutions you get shared a PDF of a schedule. You don't really know what you're looking at. You don't really know or understand because you're not a. They might be construction management oriented owners, but you're not building every day, so that might also be confusing. And they probably feel, that trust is polarizing because they say, okay, we have open books from our general contractor. We know what's going on. We're participating. It is one team and not so much. The industry is very often I'm hiding my cards. Don't look at what I'm doing because I'm afraid to get in trouble. And it feels like a lot of the time we talk to a lot of contractors that are sometimes stuck in that detailed schedule, and I need to have a schedule and everything is in Microsoft Project. But if you can't have the trade contractors, your superintendent, the owner, the design team, the inspector, whoever, find the information they need so they could show up and build, it's just slowing you down in the end.
Yeah, and that is exactly how that project team's working. It is a total buy-in from all parties, right? And truly approaching that project as truly a team. It's not contractor versus owner type of, and sometimes you do run into that. And we're very blessed. Most of our work is negotiated. So, we're working with like-minded, clients and developers on that front. And again, it's one of those things that the owners paid for that additional tower crane, offered it up, but they offered it up because we were able to provide, okay, if we do this, we showed them the schedule. They got in there and were working, together with our team to understand, okay, if we do this, um, does it make sense to spend a substantial amount of money if it's going to pick us up time? They wanted to have that feedback from us. And, we were able to, analyze that, plug that in, and give them some real accurate information. And I think a
Nice.
lot of that, this platform is easy to use. So, it's not complicated. So it's easy, and that was a matter of a couple of days, going through all that exercise to make a very big decision, to spend a lot of money. But at the end of the day, it's showing and proving that we're picking up time.
And that's the ultimate goal. You could, and I'll take it to a car analogy, but if you could be given a Formula One, if you don't know how to drive it, you're not going to get any faster than the one next to it that has an easier car to drive. And I think in your
That's right.
case, that's really our purpose at Outbuild, is to bring a solution that the field can leverage, and we can only accomplish this if it's easy to use. Of course, you need your contract scheduling, ABCs, because you need to have a Gantt schedule, you need to have a critical path, you need to have milestones, but making it easy is, I think, what is getting us the success we get to. And I think probably what made it easier for you on the transition side, because if you don't have to spend 20 hours learning a scheduling tool, and if it's a 2-hour session with the help of our team that is train you, there's a lower barrier to entry also for superintendent, maybe less frustration for them to feel like, oh, I'm learning something new, it's going to be hard, because it's been hard for the last 20 years of my life using Excel anyway. And there's apprehension there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. It's like uh, the pushback, right, was before they even saw
Yeah, always.
platform, right? It's like, oh, we don't want change. We don't want change. It's like, you haven't even seen it yet. We talked about it, right? It was on the meeting invite. Hey, we're going to talk about this in our next project management superintendent meeting. We're introducing, a new scheduling platform. Oh no, we don't want this. But you're right, and I think that's the other thing that we saw initially with this, right? I think our approach, we want to make things simple. There's enough there's enough complicated things in what we do to build these buildings from the ground up, right? We run into enough challenges. We want a simple platform that can accomplish what we need to accomplish. And that was the other thing that we saw with this is like, okay, Microsoft Project, right? That's what we were using before we transitioned to this. It accomplished stuff, but I think there was too many functions to it, and we didn't use all of them anyway. And the user friendliness of this platform from both the overall schedule and the look ahead was something else that intrigued us to dive into this platform for sure.
I'd put you on the spot here maybe, but we hear every day probably the most common objection we hear is that it's either our superintendents aren't going to use it, when we're trying to pitch or sell our build. And we know that people are concerned with the adoption, but what would you say if you're talking to another general contractor or VP, when hearing my superintendents won't use it, I don't think it's going to work. They're kind of giving up before trying. What would you tell another general contractor based on your experience?
If they can take a marker and make marks on a whiteboard, they can use this platform.
Nice. That's it.
So I mean, in all honesty, right? It's like my little girls when they were babies can color. I mean, literally, if somebody can color, and this is where we were just having a discussion internally about a different project team, and it's like you got to analyze each individual, right? Some are going to be more capable to do a little bit more, no matter what it is, right? Whether it's a scheduling platform, whether it's marking up drawings on Procore. Some individuals are able to do a little bit more. Some are able to do not as much, right? So again, from my level, we kind of identify our project teams like, okay, project engineer, you're going to be tasked with updating the overall schedule. With this particular site team, we need you to do a little bit more, right? It's help get this set up and then just ask them to update it. This project team, project B, hey, this superintendent is more capable of this. Just get the overall and you guys have that meeting. He's able to set it up and adjust it and move it around, no problem. But it is so easy. I think once these guys actually get in the platform and use it, I mean, it really is an easy platform. It's like really anybody can do it. If they can make a mark on a whiteboard, they can take their mouse or their finger and move and adjust this look ahead schedule.
And for the record, I did not pay you to say that. So that's why I say it's on this. But no, I love it. I say sometimes if you know how to use Excel, you'll know how to use Outbuild. And you're saying if you know how to write, you know how to use Outbuild. So it's a good point. That's the main concern everybody has. And we like we did with yourself, with your team, we push for like a workshop and evaluation. Try it, you'll see. And sometimes we don't get to that point because they're just the change factor on we're humans, we terrified of change. And we understand, right? Sometimes it might be too much, but the try and see usually gets to success. So we always tell contractors, don't worry, you're not the first one to tell us this. Just give it a shot. Give it a shot, and we'll show you that it's worth your time. And it's been built by builders like myself and a lot of people on my team that we needed this for so long. So we said, let's try and build it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
is there anything on the Procore side that I think we could talk about, because I know Procore is your main project management software. So we want at Outbuild to connect as much as we can with Procore, and some of the integration that we have, whether it's the schedule, the submittals, the RFIs. I'd be curious if you've had any return from your team on the benefits of this, or if you are on the leadership side, the true benefits of having Procore connecting to your schedule now finally. How does that play into your use of Outbuild?
Yeah, so I think with what I just said a little bit ago, with trying to simplify things, right? Technology is great, and I think there's so many good tools and platforms that are being designed out there, right? I think one of the things, it can be overwhelming, right? When you start looking for certain tools or this, right? And it's finding the right platforms that work together. We decided it's like, okay, tracking submittals, with this COVID, right? The procurement and delays with the supply chain caused a lot of issues. So how do we better manage that piece? Understanding, okay, this switch gear is going to be 30 weeks before we receive it on site. How are we tracking that and managing that if it delays a little bit or if it comes in earlier? We did look at a certain platform for that piece, and then it was like it was really robust, but now it's another platform. We got to go from one thing to another. And we kind of stepped back a little bit, and it's like, okay, let's manage this within Procore. We set up some simple reports, and then we're starting to tie in some of this stuff. I think the submittal function being able to be tied to our schedule. We started implementing that on one of our projects, and I think it's really powerful, right? We're simplifying things. We don't have too many platforms out there, but we can track, like, we understand, plug in all the information. Now we got an icon that shows up and notifies us. We're in that schedule every day now, managing that schedule. Now it's also giving us input on submittals. Oh shoot, this thing's popping up in red. We've got an issue. Let's have a conversation about it. Let's dig into this. What can we do to overcome this issue? The other thing, is we're kind of taking baby steps, right? It's like,
Yeah,
there's a
absolutely.
lot of different things, but I think the roadblock is going to be a really powerful tool to help us manage issues, and help identify things that need to get addressed to not affect our schedule. It's stuff that we deal with all the time. Okay, we got this RFI. We need this permit before we can do this work. Now we can tie that into our schedule. Again, now we're in a platform that our team is looking at every day. That information's feeding into that. We're up to date with, okay, now this is becoming an issue. We got to get it resolved. So I think some of that integration is really, really powerful. We haven't got all of it tied in, right? We're kind of introducing a little bit at a time. But yeah, definitely see some benefits with that for sure.
And this was one of pet peeve of mine because I spent when I was at DPR construction, we had a massive job where, of course, seminars and procurement is always a challenge. So my role for a few months was just to help all the project engineers, making sure we could track accurately. And sometimes you don't be good at something you don't want to do, because I knew how to use P6 at the time. I had to look at schedule updates. Did the dates change? I need to update this in my Excel spreadsheet to make sure we get the seminars approved on time, and then go back to the project management tool, CMIC, go back there to update it. So you need someone to do this. And I did this full time for 4 or 5 months, which was needed on the project. And now if you could eliminate that Excel spreadsheet and your schedule talks to your project management tool, that's one thing less you have to do. And now you could spend more time on those submittals that are behind. And what's the conversation, Mr. Arna? See, you have access to. It's late. It's okay. What's going on? What could we do? Could we shorten the lead time? Could we get some help from design time to get it approved before? But at least ahead of time that there might be a problem. So it gives you, a couple of weeks maybe to figure it out, and you don't fall on your face if someone forgot to update Excel and you're like, oh wow, we never ordered this, because there's a human component of it.
Yeah, I think, talking with our team, right, having all the information, because it comes down to, right, we're making decisions on the job. And if we have all this information, now we're tying in RFIs, and okay, we know this is a critical RFI that we got to get an answer, or it's going to affect this scope of work, and being able to tie that in there. Now that information is feeding into one location, it makes us more efficient. Hopefully, right, we're able to identify things that we need to get answers on. It sparks conversation sooner than it becoming a crisis. And then we rush to make a decision. Maybe it's not the best decision, but we got to have this answer by 2 o'clock, or we can't make this concrete pour and all this stuff. So being able to have all that information in one place. And the other thing, and I'm sure it's hard to find people, right? So we've got to figure out how to be more efficient with the staff and the people that we do have, and feeding that stuff all into one place definitely helps with that effort.
Yeah, I mean, that's in the end, that's the goal, right? Technology is supposed to help you save time so your team can do the human decision that you need to be done by a human. But then that the rest of it that could be, you know, the double data entry that they probably hated at the time because, nobody wants to spend time entering data in 3 different software, was probably frustrating. But Greg, I think we're getting at time. Thank you so much. This was a great conversation. I don't know if Lee, you want to come back in, we could wrap.